You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we have a pretty big update for today as we're all waiting on this impending indictment in Manhattan. The grand jury was called off for today, Wednesday. So, what are the possibilities in terms of when they'll hold the indictment vote?
So there are several possibilities. I think it's important to know that just because the grand jury votes to indict on a particular day, it is very unlikely that the indictment would be unsealed and an arrest would be made the same day. Because here's how it ordinarily works. We go into the grand jury at the end of an investigation. We say, folks, we think the evidence supports you voting on these five charges. For example, the grand jury will vote. If they vote to indict, that remains sealed because the next thing we have to do is we have to go to the judge. We have to get an arrest warrant for the person who has just been indicted by the grand jury. And then we have to go about arresting the person before he or she ever gets wind that there's been an indictment. So if an indictment was handed down on Wednesday, you might not see an arrest until the following week when all of the pieces could be put in place. Now, there is some back and forth about whether Donald Trump will or will not be arrested. I think the smart money is riding on a voluntary surrender. In white collar cases, when we don't think the person who has been indicted is a flight risk or a danger to the community, we can put a pin in flight risk, certainly. But what we will ordinarily do is call up the defense attorneys for the target of the investigation, the person who has just been indicted, and say, we want you to turn yourself into FBI headquarters or to the local police department, depending on the jurisdiction, at 9 a.m. on Monday. You will be booked and you will then be walked into court and arraigned on the indictment.
Okay. Now, because this is such a high profile case, what are you reading from the tea leaves in terms of what you believe has happened so far? Do you believe it's possible that they could have already voted on indictment and that just hasn't been unsealed yet?
Possible, but not likely. And here's why I say that. A rebuttal witness, Bob Costello, a mouthpiece, a surrogate for Donald Trump, was put before the grand jury because in New York, a defendant who's about to be indicted can offer up a witness to try to go into the grand jury and exonerate him or talk the grand jury out of indicting him. And Donald Trump put up this guy, Robert Costello. I think that was a tactical blunder. But Costello testified on Monday, which was the last time the grand jury sat. They were scheduled to sit today, but they're not sitting today for some reason. So I think it's very unlikely, Brian, that Costello would have testified on Monday afternoon, and the next thing the prosecutors would have done is ask the grand jury to vote out an indictment. So I suspect the grand jury has not yet voted, but they could have voted on Monday. And then the DA's office could be going through the process we just described, figuring out when they want to unseal the indictment and when they want to have Donald Trump voluntarily turn himself in.
Okay, so with that said, let's game this out and say that the grand jury does vote to indict and they do move forward with unsealing it, and it's time to basically arrest Donald Trump. What's the TikTok of what happens next to Trump in the minutes and hours following?
Yeah, so once the grand jury votes to indict him, so between that time and the time he actually walks into court to be arraigned on the indictment, which just means reading him the indictment so he has notice of the charges against which he has to defend, there are a few things that will go on. First of all, president or no president, former president or no former president, he will be booked. What does booking look like? Well, before you go to court, you go into a police station and the police fill out a whole bunch of paperwork. They get all sorts of background, biographical, address information about you. And then they will fingerprint you and then they will take mugshots. They will take arrest photos. So Donald Trump may succeed in avoiding a perp walk, but we will see mugshots of a former president of the United States. And let me back up to the perp walk because we've heard some reporting, Donald Trump being all full of bravado, one of the things he's full of, saying, I want a perp walk because, I'm going to use that basically as a fundraising vehicle. If they can do it to me, they can do it to you. I think it's unlikely that there will be a perp walk. And even more importantly, when I hear people talk incessantly, Brian, about well, if Donald Trump's indicted, this is going to help him with his base. It's going to help his poll numbers. It's going to help him politically. Conversely, some people say it's going to hurt him politically. I will tell you, as a career prosecutor, I would tune all of that out because I would never make a charging decision or an indictment decision based on those sorts of collateral consequences. Every time I decided to indict somebody, I knew I would likely make a batch of people happy and a batch of people unhappy, regardless of whether I decided to indict or decline to indict. But those were never considerations. It was about the facts and the law, regardless of the status of the person or the collateral consequences of an indictment.
Now, just to be clear, confirming that if he does take a mugshot, that will be public?
It will. Typically, mugshots are released by the police. So strictly speaking, a mugshot is not a public record, but I think we have seen historically that mugshots get released, by police departments all the time.
Now, we spoke previously about when we can expect an actual trial. You'd mentioned sometime between 6 months and a year from now, but will Trump need to be present in all of the pretrial occurrences that happen?
Yeah, great question. So in civil proceedings, like, Donald Trump is always being sued by somebody or another. Ordinarily, the respondent in a civil suit, that is the defendant, is not generally required to attend every court proceeding. And often the defense attorneys in a civil suit will just waive their client's presence. Not so in a criminal case. In a criminal case, you basically have to be present for every single court proceeding. And interestingly, you generally have to be actually present, not virtually present. Now, a defense team can try to waive their client's appearance, but most judges in a criminal case are pretty disapproving of that. Because if you're facing the possibility of being incarcerated at the end of this process, judges are determined that you are fully informed, indeed present, at every single court hearing in your case.
Now, will those instances, those pretrial courtroom appearances, will they be public?
They are public, yes. That you have to. The Constitution provides for public trials, and judges aren't permitted to close courtrooms except for national security matters. Rarely do they do that. But I don't believe cameras are in the courtrooms in New York, so I don't think we will see a televised trial unless they decide that the public interest is so important that they want to allow this trial to be publicly televised.
Got it. Glenn, will you be in that courtroom?
I will. Here's what I will. I will be in the courtroom when and if, I'm going to go with when, Donald Trump is indicted federally for either the documents crimes or the insurrection, because that will be in my backyard here in Washington, D.C., in a courthouse in which I tried lots of cases. So I'll be present for that. I doubt I'm going to head up to Manhattan to try to get into a courtroom that is likely going to be overflowing.
Just like on the logistics of that, how are you going to get in? Because I would imagine that would be a pretty hot ticket. Is it basically because you've been able to try cases there that it'll be easier for you to get into that courtroom?
I wouldn't say I am prepared to call in any and all favors. I might have, but having tried multiple RICO cases in that very courthouse and pretty much knowing most of the folks who work there, I will try to arrange to be, first in line to make sure I get a seat in the courtroom.
Now, here's a question I'm getting a lot. Will this indictment in Manhattan be any impediment to Donald Trump running for office?
Sadly, no. It won't be any legal impediment. It might be a practical impediment, right? Not a good look if you're running for president and you're also pending a criminal trial that could send you to prison. But I think Donald Trump has already announced, now rarely do I take him at his word, but he's already announced, you know what, indictment or no indictment, I am not dropping out. And I'm here for it. You know what? Let him run as an indicted defendant pending prison. I don't think that will increase his odds of getting elected.
Well, with that said, what about the other cases that he's at risk of being indicted for, including Fulton County, Georgia, including the E. Jean Carroll defamation case, including the classified documents case, the January 6th case?
Yeah, none of it will be a legal impediment to him running for office. The only thing that would be a legal impediment is if he is convicted of a federal charge that carries with it the possible sentence of a prohibition from holding federal office in the future. That's the only way he would legally be prohibited. not necessarily from running for federal office, but holding federal office.
Could that be one of the conditions set forth, in terms of like a guilty plea or some plea deal overall? Like, could a condition be set where he's barred from running for federal office, and that would preclude him from serving prison time, for example?
That's a great question. There's lots of leeway that prosecutors and defense teams have in negotiating terms of a plea agreement, or let me add, a non-pros agreement, an agreement not to prosecute somebody if he or she agrees to a set of conditions. Usually those conditions, Brian, involve, you have to stay out of trouble. You have to avoid all rearrests. And if you do, the prosecutors may sort of decline to ever charge you for a particular crime. But of course, those agreements are only as good as the people who enter into them. So the prosecution could say, look, if you agree never to run for office, we will agree never to prosecute you. And then Donald Trump could later throw his hat in the ring. Of course, that would revive the prosecution's ability to prosecute him. But if it's a few years down the road, memories might have faded, evidence might have gone missing, and it might be more difficult to prosecute him. So I actually hope we don't see some kind of a creative disposition of Donald Trump's cases like that.
Got it. Okay, well, with that said, things are moving very fast in this case with this impending indictment. So if you want to keep up on everything that's happening, make sure to follow both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.